All right, welcome back to A Different Perspective.
Last episode, we talked about taking control of your photography and learning the exposure triangle. And in this episode, we want to apply that same way of thinking when it comes to gear.
So don't let the gear control you. You control the gear that you use and own. Focusing on the gear and learning a bunch of new equipment is actually kind of shooting yourself in the foot in a way, because you're not focusing on learning the principles of photography and you're not getting better at the craft. So instead of focusing on the gear, focus on the craft, and that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Whenever we create, let it be more about the skills and what we've learned and less about the gear itself. And with that thinking in mind, we are going to talk about our own personal experience with gear.
So I am purposefully a major gearhead, and my B&H wish list is kind of ridiculous. I think I've got like $10,000 worth of stuff in there that I just haven't been able to get to, and it's honestly because they're cool more than they are useful or practical. So we're each gonna share a little bit about some of the gear that we've purchased that was helpful and we use all the time, and gear that we got and maybe only used once or just kind of looked at and it's been sitting on the shelf ever since. So I'll start with some of my things. So one of the things I got that I thought would be really helpful, and in certain circumstances could be, but it's just so rare that you would need it, is this giant sheet of diffusion fabric. It's like huge. It could fill a room the size of like a massive like dining room or something. It just goes on and on and on. So that's something I bought that was kind of silly. Like, I guess it could make sense if you wanted to like build your own diffusion sheets and stuff, but I'm not much of a DIY person, so who knows, maybe in the future I'll learn how.
You brought up the dining room though, so you could use it as a dining room cloth.
Tablecloth?
Yeah, tablecloth.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe I'll just repurpose it as a tablecloth. It's pretty inexpensive, honestly. The next thing is UV filters. I got a crap ton of UV filters because I wanted to protect my lenses, and I realized I never use them. They just kind of get in the way for me. I know some people are avid UV filter users, but for me, unless you get a really nice one, it's gonna just add artifacts and lens flares, and it's just kind of a waste of money in my opinion. But again, depends on the work you're doing. If you're out in the field doing a lot of crazy dusty stuff, you might want some. All right, here's another one. Next of stuff that I never ever use is a ton of like GoPro accessories. So I've got like the waterproof cages, which nowadays they're basically waterproof anyway, unless you're deep diving. Like the chest mount for like biking and stuff, I never touched it, unfortunately. And then all these sticky things, and the only thing I've used is for my motorcycle helmet, because that's all I really ever use it for. This one may or may not resonate with some people, but I never ever use my shoulder strap. So I've got this one from Peak Design. It's really nice. It's the first Peak Design thing I ever bought actually, and I love it. And I did use it until I got the capture mount system and then just a backpack. And honestly, I use that and like a little cuff on my wrist so I don't drop it, because I feel like this just kind of is cumbersome. Not to say I haven't used it, but I just haven't touched it for a long time. And then the last thing I got that was kind of useless that I just never use except for like storage, so I guess in that case it's okay, is this shoulder bag for photography. It looks okay, it's not amazing, but at the same time carrying this for extended periods of time really aches your back because it only pulls down on one shoulder and you have to swap, and it's not super practical, so I'd recommend a nice backpack over a shoulder bag most of the time. So that's it for the gear that I never use and was kind of silly for me. Again, it may vary for you guys, but just keep in mind what you're buying and if it's useful or if it's just cool. All right, now talking about gear that I've bought that is useful, you may have noticed the scene just changed. Those lights up there are now on because I forgot to turn them on, but those are little RGB LED lights and they have the full spectrum of RGB. You can get some really cheap ones, but these are the Aperture MCs and they're really awesome. I really enjoy them, but so that's one thing. Another thing that I really recommend you invest in early is a rocket blower. So these things allow you to blow dust and stuff off your lens, off your sensor, and it's way better than using canned air, especially for electronics, because you're not getting little particles thrown out. This is a really dry, safe way. So this is like essential, and they're pretty affordable and they'll last forever. So definitely pick one up. And then lastly, I would recommend Invest in glass in the lenses that will help you with the type of work you do. I had a really strong focus, and still do, on product photography, so I got myself a nice macro lens. I mean, you don't have to get, something super crazy expensive to begin with, obviously, but you want to think about the kind of work you're doing and invest in glass that's good for that, because lenses, they last forever. They're a good investment. They're not going to be useless to you unless you decide to change camera brands later down the road. So that's it for me. Kyle, what you got, bro?
So I guess I'll start off the opposite way and go with the more practical gear, which I agree with everything you said, John. Going off of glass, one of the most recent purchases that I've had, and I actually traded in old lens that I had to adapt. So it was a Tamron lens. I loved it. It was the 15 to 30 wide angle lens, because I like doing a lot of landscape and wide angle shoots. But I actually picked up the native Nikon 14 to 30 f4S lens right in front of my face. This thing has been super helpful, and it's reduced the size of my kit drastically. I don't have to carry around the adapter, at least for this lens. It just natively fits right on the body. So that's been awesome. And then one thing that John mentioned to me was actually about extension tubes for macro photography. Because I didn't have the money to necessarily pick up a macro lens, but something that I found was a macro extension tube that actually worked out really well and can fit on all of my lenses that are native to the Nikon Z6 body. So that was really an essential purchase, because that let me do and start creating things without having to spend a ton of money on buying a new lens. So in those cases, if you want to learn something new and you haven't really done a lot of it, or you aren't making money doing it, you can look into other solutions that are less expensive that get you introduced into that subject. So then you're not shelling out, hundreds or thousands of dollars on a brand new lens. So then to end this with the not practical purchases, I don't have most of those on me because I've either sold them and I'm still paying off the interest on them. But that's something I really wanted to bring up, is sometimes you can get so caught up in the hype or think you need a particular prime lens or a new camera body. And I've done both of those things. I bought a second camera body, the same Nikon Z6, and an 85mm prime lens to go along with that as well. So I thought I was gonna be doing more portrait work, but if I really would have looked into the setup that I have and the space that I have, I would have realized that the 85mm wasn't the right fit for the particular space that I had as a studio setup. It was beautiful and really nice for outdoor work, but I just wasn't doing a lot of that. And I picked up the second camera body so I could do some extra like corporate work or have it as a second body on me when I was shooting concerts. And obviously with the pandemic going on, both of those things aren't really practical right now. So I ended up selling both of those just to pay off some of the debt that I accrued from purchasing those. So I just kind of want to end it with learn from my mistakes and don't buy things that you think would be nice to have, but then you don't end up getting the opportunity to use them. And you could, instead of purchasing those things, you could rent those items for that specific job and just build it into the budget of that job that you're doing, instead of shelling out thousands of dollars to have it eventually sit on the shelf or not be using it. And then if you're like me, you end up not having that gear anymore, but you're still paying off the interest for it. Don't be like me. Don't buy that gear. Guess that's the lesson.
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot. And one thing I would say that you can kind of think about as you're approaching work and you're anticipating needing gear, but you don't have it, obviously renting it is a good option if you really think it's a wise idea to have the gear. But I would say go to the shoots with the gear you have, and if you need something, it'll be obvious and it will present itself. And if it's a client that you work with often or a type of work you do quite a bit, then you can think about investing in it. But I would say first, just do the shoot and see what you can get done with the gear you have. If it's obvious you need something, go ahead and pick it up, rent it, try it out, and then purchase it if you end up using it a lot.
I feel like we go through seasons every single year where there's so much hype about new camera gear and new camera bodies that are coming out from virtually every company out there. And yes, while the latest and greatest stuff is great to have, it's jam-packed with all the features, sometimes it's really not practical. And it can be easy for us as photographers, filmmakers, and creatives to get caught up in that hype and think that, well, the stuff that I have, it's not that great. And I need to have what they're talking about if I think I'm gonna be successful. And that's really not what it's about. I feel like instead of investing a lot of money in that gear that they're hyping up, it can be a lot better for us to re-examine the stuff that we have and find new ways to create with that. Find, if there's limitations that your current gear has, find ways to go around those limitations and create and learn from those limitations. And that's ultimately how we end up being really creative with the stuff that we have.
Yeah, exactly. As creatives, it's basically our job to work within constraints. If we're given complete creative freedom with unlimited money and unlimited time and just no restraint at all, then it's really hard to actually be creative and create something great. So creating restraints is one way to be more creative, but also just limiting yourself with the gear that you have. Like, think about the minimum you can take with you and try things out. Like, just take a prime lens and your body and go out and shoot something and see what you can achieve. Like, create a very specific goal and see if you can get that with the gear that you have. Obviously, there are gear that makes your life way easier, and that's something you can grow into, but it's not that you need it, it's more that it's nice to have. So be sure to make that differentiation as well. But with that, let's move into working through the photo challenge from the last episode. We're gonna show you what we did. Okay, hopefully the wind isn't too bad, but I'm out here trying to get a picture of the freeze frame, and what I thought of was riding my dirt bike. Let me flip the camera around. This is where I'm setting up the camera. I have it in time-lapse mode. It's gonna take a picture every second for 5 minutes, so I'm just gonna keep doing loops and starting at the same position each time. And hopefully that'll get the shot that I want. So I'm going with 1/1000th of a second shutter. The aperture was open at f2.8, and the ISO was set on automatic, and it was sitting around 100, 125. So hopefully 1/1000th is fast enough to capture all that cool motion. If it's blurry, I'm just gonna have to come out and do it again because my SD card is full right now. Okay, so I hope this audio works. This is my second attempt doing this. Realized my pictures were still blurry, so I upped to 1/4000th of a second, and I changed up the angle as well, so hopefully the composition's actually a little more fun. Yeah, but let's go. And then I put a filter on the front just so that I can roost the crap out of this thing and not worry about scratching up my lens. This is a really nice macro 90mm lens. So hopefully that all works out pretty well. But yeah, let's do this. That was fun. So back inside after taking hundreds of photos and narrowing it down to these few, these are the ones that I chose as my top that had the most interest in them. There's like pieces flying everywhere, but I wanted to also make sure the composition was good and that it represented the freeze frame stuff really well. So a lot of these are great and I love them and they're fun. Ripping a wheelie there, that was pretty cool. But one that I think turned out the best compositionally, I really like this mud in here too, was this one. And I actually ran it by my wife and ran it by Kyle and myself. We all agreed, which is really cool. I didn't plant any seeds in their minds, but we all agreed this one was the best compositionally. Just feels nice, and it also really represents this frozen mud in time, but it's not too busy. So that is the one that I went with. And this is the before And the after, just so you can see it real quick, basically all I did is with the A7 III, when you bring the raw images into Lightroom, it gives you the option to have the Adobe Color or Adobe Landscape profile. So I switched it to Landscape. It just clamps the highlights and the shadows really nicely, which is awesome. Then I bumped the exposure because it was pretty low. If you see the before, I was just because there's so much sky in there, that's how it worked out. But thankfully raw images, I was able to really bring that up. So I bumped the exposure on a lot of these images quite a bit. The contrast I didn't touch. Instead, what I did is I lowered the highlights so that I preserved as much detail as possible in the sky. And then I cranked the whites all the way up so that it just was barely not clipping. And I brought the blacks down a little bit until they weren't clipping either. In this case, it was just one. Some of them are a little lower, some of them are a little higher. And I didn't do anything with the curves. It's just very simple this time around. And then with color, I literally hardly touched anything. It's already so vibrant. I don't think we really need to boost it anymore. The only thing I did change is I took the blue from the sky and made it more of like a teal, like a cyan color, just to kind of give that contrast to the red, which I really liked. And that is it. Effects wise, I didn't really do much except I did add a vignette. So if I before, after, you can kind of see maybe there's a vignette here on the edges. And I let the highlights fall through, and then it's really feathered out. So it's pretty minimal, I think. At least I like to think it's pretty minimal. No split toning, anything like that. So after that, I did boost the sharpening because I wanted to really accentuate the texture of the dirt flying through the air. So all this stuff is textured out like crazy, but it did work pretty well. And I did mask it quite heavily. If I hold Alt and hold on this slider here, you can see I masked it quite a bit so that none of the sky is really getting sharpened or anything like that. And that's it for the primary corrections. I did also hop into the brush, and you can see here I brushed just this little area covered in red there, and I added a crap load of texture and clarity and really made all those little chunks kind of stand out from everything else. That was the goal. And I cranked the whites and the highlights up so that we really got a lot more punch out of those dirt clods and really show them off. So that's basically it. And I just kind of did that for all of these pictures, but this is the final photo again, before and after, and that is my submission.
All right, so originally my plan was to share the audio that I was recording when I was at Gallagher Beach, located at the Outer Harbor in Buffalo, New York. But it was so windy, which is exactly what I was looking for, because basically I wanted to capture the water splashing up from Lake Erie against these big boulders, against something that would make a huge splash so I could stop that motion. Which is exactly what we needed to do for this freeze frame photo challenge. So diving into the edit, I took a couple hundred photos here just because with the water being so unpredictable and the way it was going to look, I just wanted a lot of options that I could choose from and make as the final edit. And so I narrowed it down out of over a couple hundred photos to these four. Really liked this one, and I was almost gonna go with that same thing with this one as well. The problem is, in all these other ones, there's a lot of other things in the image that are kind of distracting to the freeze frame or freezing the motion of the water. I do like how the water is frozen in these photos, but I just ended up going with this first one. I just thought that even though it's not the biggest splash that I captured from the water that day, I just really liked how the water droplets were forming on this one, and how when I cropped this photo, down and took out part of the pier here, it was just really focused, and right in the center of the frame was that freeze frame of the motion of the water splashing up on the rocks. My exposure time for this photo was 1/640th of a second, and I shot this at f5 so I could get some more detail and still retain some shallow depth of field there. I focus in on this part of the rock so I would get a lot of the splash in focus. This is what we started off as the original, And this is what we ended up for the final edit. I changed the color profile to Adobe Landscape, boosted the exposure just a tad, boosted the contrast, lowered the highlights quite a bit, as you can see, lowered the shadows a bit too, boosted the whites, and lowered the blacks just a little bit. I made the temperature a little bit cooler than what I shot it at in camera. And then the only thing that I messed around with for the color mixer was I lowered the saturation and boosted the luminance on the teal. And for the blue, I lowered the saturation and lowered the luminance on the blue. All right, so for the effects, I boosted the texture, clarity, and dehaze by 20, brought in a -15 for the vignette, and then for the detail, I boosted this up to 70, and I masked this. And what I did was put that mask at 80, so it would get a little bit of the rock, but mainly be focusing the sharpening right on the water droplets that were splashing over the rock. And that is my full edit. So this is going to be another vague one, but it is going to be drone photography.
All right, that sounds awesome. I'm excited, yes.
I feel like this is more of a challenge for myself because I haven't taken the drone that I got out in probably 2 months. So that's another reason why I want to do it. I want to, challenge myself, and I see it's something that you're doing a lot. So I want to get in on the fun and challenge myself and learn more about it. That's what this is all about.
Nice. Yeah, dude, that's awesome and really exciting because now that we're going to be in a place that we have that comfort and freedom to go to locations and shoot drone stuff is going to be really cool. But also on the topic of gear that you don't use often, don't rag on Kyle about this because it was given to him. He didn't buy it, just so you know.
It was a Christmas gift from my parents. They're awesome.
There's a life hack. If you want something that is really nice or is kind of impractical but a good to have, but you don't want to spend the money on it, see if someone will get it for you.
That's right. Put it on that Christmas list, that wish list. Sometimes dreams can come true.
You never know. Thank you so much for watching this episode of A Different Perspective. If you haven't seen our previous episode yet, we've got a few in the can. You can go check those out and see what photo challenges we've done in the past and try them out yourself. And if you want to join us for future challenges and this challenge, follow us on Instagram at A Different Perspective TV and use the hashtag A Different Perspective TV to submit your photos to the next challenge. Other than that, don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the bell so that you know when the next challenge comes out, and we'll see you in the next one. And I just stole that entire outro segment from Kyle, so do you have anything else to add before we go?
No, bye.